Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Mission Control, a podcast focused on executive directors and nonprofit leaders and how they strive to make positive impacts in their community. I'm your host, Paul Schmidt, owner and creative video strategist for UnoDeuce Multimedia, and I'd like to welcome a good friend of mine, Gabe Biber, the executive director of Fenner Nature Conservancy. Is that right? Nature Conservancy? Do I have it right?
Yeah, Fenner Conservancy. Yeah, everyone knows us for the Nature Center.
Yep.
But yeah, the Conservancy includes the Nature Center as well as some other fun activities.
Okay, awesome. Well, thanks for coming on to the show. And typically how I start this each episode, the name of the show is Mission Control. Let's start with the mission. What's the mission of Fenner?
Sure. So the mission of Fenner Conservancy is to connect people with nature in the heart of Lansing through conservation, education, and stewardship.
Awesome. And what's interesting is I'm going to start right off the bat talking about a connection that I'm not sure we have with an individual that's well known in the Lansing area. And you worked with them early in the 2010s, I believe, and that's Julie Powers.
Oh, yeah.
So we're going to start off with that. So talk to me a little bit about your time with Julie and Mid-MEAC, because that kind of somewhat leans into you going back into the nature world, if you think.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So yeah, when I think about, joining the nonprofit sector and coming to Lansing, even though I myself have been sober for over 5 years now, I grew up in a time and in a family culture and a culture really not just including alcohol, but specifically thinking about kind of the finer points of wine and terroir. So that was always a big thing to me, like the qualities of how a place kind of imbues the food and the taste of the things there. So I moved to Lansing to basically work for the Greater Lansing Food Bank and do kind of urban farms and community gardens. And it was really driven from my kind of passion around people and place-based food. And so while I was there, kind of doing my day job at the food bank and, helping to organize these things, I became aware of this, speaking of connections, kind of a network of related environmental and volunteer groups in the area, including Mid-Michigan Environmental Action Council. And one of the opportunities that they had available was to lead volunteers in the monitoring of stream quality locally. And so to me, it wasn't really that big of a jump between kind of like people growing their own food and taking care of the water in the area. But really, that was a chance where I kind of got to hone some of the sort of skills about, I was really new to nonprofit stuff, and I was kind of learning for the first time a methodology at the food bank around kind of like asset-based community development and working with large groups, but simultaneously working with Julie at Mid-MEAC on this other project with a different subject matter and a slightly different methodology. It was really cool for me right at the beginning to sort of think about, there isn't just one way to do this stuff. And kind of being outside of my technical expertise element, because I'm not a macroinvertebrate. I didn't know a mayfly from a damselfly. I still don't. But learning to be sort of comfortable in that situation, just like being comfortable with a group of 50 community gardeners, and we don't speak the same language, but we all know we want to like end the summer with a bunch of great food on our plates. Those were some of the connections that to me just sort of naturally happened in a small community like Lansing. I think it's inevitable.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, because, as you know, the nonprofit community here in Lansing is very interconnected. But let's go backwards and talk a little bit about your time with the food bank. How did you land there?
So it was really kind of a bit of an organic process where I had kind of started to work in kitchens. And I had kind of moved actually throughout the country, including being out in Jackson, Wyoming. And at the time I was in Cleveland, Ohio, and I had really become interested in this particular restaurant because the way the chef and owner was working with particularly the farmers market in Cleveland and really basing their, their menu seasonally and so forth. So a friend of mine who lived in Michigan at the time, said, hey, this is the kind of thing you're into. The Greater Lansing Food Bank has this really interesting program to support people growing their own food. So just based on this friend's kind of tip, I came to Lansing and interviewed and ended up moving to Lansing to work for the food bank for that. So really that was a time when there was a huge resurgence in interest in people growing their own food. So we're talking kind of like 2007 to 2012. Basically, the greater Lansing area already had this huge, rich history of urban farms and community gardens. Some of these were Hmong cultural institutions. Others were, various local people growing their own food or growing food for others. But part of this coincided with a huge influx of refugees from Burma, formerly Myanmar, and Bhutan and other areas. So there was a whole new generation and a whole new, separate set of groups of people coming in, bringing their expertise and specific culture around food and farming to the Lansing area. So I felt very fortunate to be there at that time when it was really all blowing up. And so that was for me a chance to really, I was new to Lansing. I was new to the community. I was learning about all the wonderful, strengths and things that are already in place in Lansing, and kind of getting to serve as a facilitator, really so that the new projects would get to learn from the existing projects, and that we would just sort of get to share, some of the experiences that people have had starting urban farms in Lansing, so that others could learn from it.
I guess I didn't realize that Lansing had such a, like you mentioned, a rich history of urban farming. I mean, was that also part of your move here? I know that you moved due to the Greater Lansing Food Bank, but was that discovery into the urban farming aspect just part of that discovery process when you first moved here?
Yeah. I don't want to, come across as, a snob, but I was absolutely raised with privilege in the, suburbs of Detroit. And for me, I didn't really understand like Lansing as a destination. I was like, oh yeah, we drive by Lansing on the freeway. It's the capital of the state. All right. Kind of my knowledge ended there. So to be introduced to this community and go, wow, like I'm intrigued by the commitment that so many different people here have to basically living a really sort of interesting, authentic life through, taking care of community spaces and growing their own healthy food. And that was something I had seen on my travels, but I had not really connected with in a place, that I was also trying to make home. And so that's really, what got me excited about moving to the community. And ultimately, here I still am, in the greater Lansing area to this day. And so, yeah, and being able to engage with the community through that role was really transformative for me. And, from there, I ended up moving to the homeless sector and ended up, spending over a decade, working with the homeless population. But really, I think the nature of that role was more about we're here focused in a place and folks are kind of coming to us. Whereas the food bank role was really we're going out everywhere in the community, almost to every different street corner and, church, synagogue, mosque, social club, you name it, where anyone had an interest in this. And so really that was my primer into the community. That's how I got my getting tossed in with getting to know a huge cross section of the community around based on a topic that they were passionate about. And so that really was a huge gift to me as someone who was new to the community and new to the nonprofit sector to really just be able to jump in and kind of meet people where they were at.
So you said you started out in some restaurants and kitchens. Yeah. What was your specialty?
So I ended up kind of gravitating toward the grill station. I was also, often used for prep and pantry stuff. I tried to be kind of like the way I played soccer as a kid. I wasn't necessarily the most gifted, but I tried to be, hustle on defense and all that kind of thing. So I never made it to the saute station at any of my jobs, but I tried to make myself useful and, learn fast.
That's awesome. And when it comes to the urban farming aspect or the food bank aspect, what was one tip that you have for those that are trying to either grow their own or trying to create something sustainable food-wise?
Oh, that's such a great question. I think the best advice I can give is there's no wrong way to do it, and there's no perfect amount of doing it. Some people have small scale farms and hoop houses, and other people are growing one tomato plant. I would say my advice is find the amount that works for you, the amount of effort or the type of project. And there's as many ways to grow food as there are people in this world growing food. So yeah, it's fun to get inspiration from others. But really, I think the most important thing in trying to adopt, practices related to growing and eating food that are sustainable, it's got to be sustainable for you personally. It's got to be something that you can connect with.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Good advice. That's good advice. So now you also mentioned that you shifted from the food bank to Haven House. Talk about that transition and what was the biggest eye-opening moment for you, because it is two different types of organizations. So talk about that whole shift.
Sure. I mean, I think, as you said, it's important to acknowledge how connected the community is, right? So even though there are, some really big differences there that I can talk about, just knowing that, all of these organizations rely on each other, and that, the players are also kind of interconnected, was really a big part of it. At a more macro level, I would say, when we think about the nonprofits, kind of the system we work in, I think it's becoming more commonplace now to acknowledge largely we're working to undo kind of the effects of the broader system, sort of the business capitalist system, the dominant system. And so we're kind of like a sanctioned, built-in sort of thing that goes along for the ride that kind of tries to mitigate some of those effects, right? So we have problems with, the way our society deals with food, right? And waste and things like that. And then we've got like the food banks fighting the good fight. We've got big problems with housing and inequality, and we've got the shelters and stuff, trying to do a little bit. So I think to that extent, that's really where I was just starting to kind of trying to understand my own coming to terms with, as someone in this work, do I see myself on one end of a continuum as sort of like a institutionalist, where at the worst I'm perpetuating this stuff, and maybe at best I'm like collecting a paycheck to make things a little better? Or is there like another end of the spectrum that's more like a radical activism, like we're working ourselves out of business and we're going to get to the roots of these issues? And is there somewhere in between where it's really more like landing on a day-to-day that we can sort of like pick up and carry on without the perfect being the enemy of the good? So that was the biggest, going from, hey, I think I kind of understand this and have some idealism, to I'm in a totally new area. And so for me, it was about going, I'm basically starting from scratch. I'm entering an organization where I need to learn what their needs are, who it's serving, what the clients are looking for, the types of help that's valuable, and meet the volunteers and supporters that are trying to get involved, and really just try to be a blank slate of what's the best way to serve as a facilitator, so that the people that have something to offer and are looking to offer something are able to do that in a way that really helps people. So it was really over the time of becoming, from being a volunteer coordinator there to a fundraiser and ultimately being the executive director there, the biggest thing I came to think about is, as we, other shelters and homeless service providers and food banks and others, ultimately we're trying to sort of collaborate, we kind of came to a point, almost like a stasis or a balance, where you either kind of had to make a choice. Either you were saying, you know what, we really are trying to mitigate some of this damage, maybe even dismantle these systems and work against it, or we're really just going to kind of work within the existing system. And because that's such a fraught question, I think it really brought forward to me, these are some of the kind of the tipping points in our systems where we get to almost a plateau of, we're doing the best we can within our current sort of paradigm of, we're sheltering this many people, we're rehousing this many people, we're feeding this many people. But really the question of, are we as a community trying to make more fundamental changes and really affect the overall life in our community for folks, versus sort of just providing services? I think that's really what helped my eyes opened up to when I made that transition from kind of the food bank to the shelter system, and starting to think about the way those interconnected.
And that's one thing, is like there seems to be more and more nonprofits that are geared towards the housing situations for those that are having trouble in those areas. And it just seems like there's smaller ones, larger ones. Did you find like there's similar goals, but conflicting narratives? Was there Was there situations like that? Was there,
Yeah.
Was it hard to kind of wrangle everybody in to make sure that everybody's going in the same direction?
Yeah, in fact, I ended up making a whole PowerPoint about that question, which I presented at the Michigan Building Healthy Communities, essentially homeless conference about a year ago. So my experience with that, absolutely, it's like as much as we feel like we're sort of, aiming in a common direction to achieve a common purpose, our styles are different, our methods are different, our tolerances for risk are different. And the extent to which we are willing to associate with each other and claim a common purpose or an affiliation also varies. I absolutely felt like one of the biggest opportunities or challenges kind of to the community of people trying to change, things like housing and hunger in our community really is trying to come to grips with that diversity of approaches within the movement. Because absolutely we had situations where we would have, people I might consider community activists, strongly waving the flag for specific issues or even individuals, advocating for them. But potentially sharing information that wasn't accurate or, was delivered in a way that was harmful even. And so in terms of trying to come to a balance point where we as a community of activists and nonprofit leaders hold each other accountable for, truth and serving people appropriately, while accepting those differences. I think that's really something that I don't claim to have mastered. So kind of the gist of my presentation on this topic is almost like preaching patience and just really trying to help people kind of pause and identify, yes, these are differences and they can be painful. But kind of the more that we can dwell in those differences and acknowledge them and kind of move together despite and because of those differences, that eventually we do better than just saying, man, they're a little different from us. It's just easier to go it alone, because that's kind of the silos that we've got now. And to that point, our nonprofit, I think to your question kind of about food bank to homeless shelter sort of sector, those divisions or those structures within the nonprofit sector kind of mirror those sectors in the kind of for-profit sector that we're, again, kind of trying to follow behind and clean up behind in a way. And so I think to the extent that we are able to recognize that it cuts across all of that, not just the kind of industries that we work in within the nonprofit sector, but really just the approaches that we take as organizations. I sit down and, I still, even though I'm no longer working day to day in the housing area, I sit down with folks that are in that sector day to day. And it's still interesting to me that these are some of the folks that I have some of the biggest differences from ideologically, personally, stylistically. And yet because of our shared passion for these really important things, like people having a safe place to go, we still, of our own accord, meet for breakfast and, talk about what's going on in the community to try to better understand it. And I think part of it is because we've recognized if we just sort of say, we're not going to really work together, that we miss out on something there. And that goes beyond formal collaboration. I think it's an effort we take as individuals to try to get outside of our comfort zone.
Well, I mean, are you going into the nonprofit world and being, you went from program manager to development director, learning how to fundraise, to eventually executive director. You want to talk about getting out of your comfort zone. How was moving into an executive director role in such a crucial nonprofit? How was that transition? What were things that you knew you wanted to do, and were you able to accomplish that?
I think that's a fair question. I think, the level to which something might be ambitious or overly ambitious is a bit subjective. And I think at the time I felt like I had two things that made me feel like it was the right choice to put my hat in the ring for that executive director role. So I felt like I had done the best I could do to learn this organization from inside out, outside in, basically from the ground up, kind of in that volunteer coordinator role. And then I also felt like I had this really, at least basic, but solid understanding of kind of the financial support mechanism of the organization. And so when the well-loved executive director announced their resignation, And we became aware there was going to be some external candidates. There might be some internal candidates. I felt like I had at least sufficient background and understanding to do what's right for the organization. Now, I didn't necessarily think I was going to be able to be a more visionary leader than, someone else out there. Ultimately, I left that, to that organization's board of directors to make that decision. But in that role, I, coming into it, really just had that kind of small idea of I am going to try to help this place operational and pull the levers and do the things. I didn't yet have fully internalized really the full expectation from the community and the organization that, a nonprofit leader really is more of that visionary connector, and really the operational sort of details and keeping it afloat and staying on mission are ultimately, for a seasoned executive leader, become sort of like they're supposed to go without saying. And really people are looking for those more transformative and innovative things. So I wasn't ready for that exactly when I first stepped into the role. I wasn't aware of just how creative and inspiring that role can really be for folks. And really, it was me talking to other nonprofit leaders, especially in those early days in that role, to help open my mind to what that could really mean.
That's so awesome. And then you once again, instead of you lateraled to Fenner as the executive director there, you kind of like went back to your nature roots a bit.
Yeah.
And what are you trying to bring from your experiences elsewhere to Fenner?
That has been such an interesting question for me to kind of live with over the last year since I've been at Fenner. So yeah, the idea of, being a first-time executive director at an organization where I had worked for several years is interestingly different than being now a second-time executive director at an organization that I was brand new to. So I was, my first day, here I am, sitting in the executive director seat rather than kind of working my way through various positions in the organization. So the way I've summarized that to myself and to others is sort of, I may not have as much formal nature education training as the other folks here. It's really sort of that nonprofit management that might have got me here. But similarly to, the familiarity with Haven House and nonprofit things generally largely got me into the executive role there. But I think it was being tested by COVID and the real on the ground challenges of a leader there that made me feel like, what, I do enjoy change. I do enjoy being tested in a skill area that's a little bit new to me. So whereas Haven House was a larger budget, really, kind of a more a slightly more lean organization, but really some organization that had a lot more grant funding in place and a larger donor base. Fenner is kind of sort of developmentally as an organization in a different phase of growth. And so for me, that's really what I think is part of where I have, again, a level of confidence. Hopefully that's, well placed, that I'm here to learn and grow with the organization and not necessarily say, hey, I know a good template for how a nonprofit should be, but to accept that we're going to learn together what the right solutions might be for us now. And carrying that into a place here where I understood, even applying for the job here at Fenner, my kids had gone to programs here. I had, enjoyed coming here. There's parts of Fenner that I knew or thought I knew. What I really am still continuing to be fascinated by is our connection to early childhood education. We opened a preschool just a few years ago, and those open applications are pouring in. I mean, we have a early childhood education crisis nationwide, and particularly in Michigan, in terms of there's so many kids that need access to everything from daycare to preschool to other types of care and education. And first of all, the amount available in the community is not enough. And the quality and types available often are really lagging. So what we offer is basically every kid and parent's dream of nature-based, emergent, child-led outdoor education experience, basically for all ages, everything from a fully enrolled preschooler to an elementary kid that wants to come for a summer camp, to standalone programs that we can offer. So even though what kind of drew me here was, I love nature and I think I'm an okay nonprofit administrator, what's already got me really excited for the future is how can we help the community do better for itself in terms of providing a range of these early childhood options that before you know it, 30 years is going to go by and these preschoolers are going to be the nonprofit leaders. And so like we have the blink of an eye to either disrupt some of these cycles or perpetuate them. And I think that's where kind of hopscotching around has really kept me excited about where those opportunities are.
So you'd say that, like you said, like you mentioned, when you became executive director of Haven House, that level of creativity that was there, you're reapplying it to a new phase. I like that.
Yeah, creativity is, like when I'm not on the clock here doing my day job, I'm usually like playing the trumpet or piano or guitar, none at an expert level, but I'm always having fun. Sometimes I'm doing the open mic poetry with some of the groups around town. So again, I kind of like being in that zone where creativity is required and there's almost more of a precedent on creativity than on sort of like retrieving specialized knowledge to solve a specified problem. And as long as that's the right scenario, as long as that's the right approach for the situation, I'm here for it. I also acknowledge sometimes we kind of need to say this is not the space for like visioning and creativity. We have like a specific deliverable that we need to put out there. So when it comes to kids safety, when it comes to making sure that we're meeting our promises to our supporters and providing an accessible environment for folks, it's kind of like no compromises there. But when it comes to what is the bigger vision for us for the future, I think that's where we can say, let's move together. Let's move in a way that's going to serve us all the best. And it's not about a deadline so much as it is about the quality of the deliverable we bring to the community.
So you've had quite an extensive career in the nonprofit world over the past few years, 3 different organizations. In a nutshell, is this where you thought you would be prior to joining Greater Lansing Food Bank or anything like that? Was this where you thought that this would take you?
No. If I thought I was going to have a job that involved math at all, I would have gone, running for the hills. And also, while I sometimes enjoy a little spark of extroversion, it's also not like my preferred mode. So I would say it's not something I could have predicted, but it's been a wonderful education and journey to understand that there is a place in the world for folks that might not have like that great mental arithmetic. They can still, have a role that does involve some quantitative reasoning and make a difference in the world. But I think that for me is, it's really rewarding to be able to help people in a way that is tangible and is not necessarily something that has to be done the same way every time, but can be kind of responsive. And being in this industry, this nonprofit day job, it's interesting in the way that we, I think, become used to helping people. And that sort of excitement around all of that, again, I didn't expect. I didn't realize that I was going to get to have a job where a part of my life, really every day, is I can reflect on something that made someone's life better. Don't usually actually talk about it because we as nonprofit professionals tend to get a little like when people say, oh, your work must be so rewarding. We're like, yeah, I just got done doing like a thankless task and I'm not processing that right now. But yeah, when we have the chance to say, like, did we expect to work in roles that were going to essentially not really match up with any job description, and yet every day provide an endless source of variety? That's really a special place to be. I'm really grateful for it.
That's awesome. And I think that's a perfect way to close out this program or this show specifically. But if anybody has any more questions for you or wants to contact you, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Sure. Well, my first name is Gabriel, Gabriel. And our website at Fenner Conservancy is mynaturecenter.org. So it's mynaturecenter.org. So if you want to email me, gabriel@mynaturecenter.org if you want to visit the website. And if you just want to stop by the Nature Center and go for a walk, connect with me, be happy to walk around, look at the birds and butterflies. So, as folks are watching this, also be aware, summertime's a great time to visit the Nature Center. Fall is also a great time. We have our wonderful Apple Butter Festival, but year-round, 7 days a week, free to come and stop by. Hope to see you out there.
And I will have to second that. I've done many a walk at Fenner amongst all the other nature centers that we have in the area. In fact, that's a crucial part of any community. Yeah. And so thanks for being on the show, Gabe. Really appreciate it. It was a great conversation. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Paul.
All right, no problem. And thank you all again for taking some time to listen to our program. And don't miss the next episode coming out in a couple weeks. If there's someone you know of that you would like to hear about their journey, please email me at missioncontrol@UnoDeuce.com. And if this is your first time here, please subscribe on YouTube or your favorite podcasting platform and give us a review. Thank you again, and see you next time in the Control Center.